Morning, everybody. How we doing today? Today, we're going to talk about something kind of fun, and that's the 45. And the 45 is an interesting development in the music business, and we'll get back to it in just a second. Super Bowl yesterday, didn't watch a second of it. Tom Brady's legacy, cement, enough said. Good for him. It's always impressive when a guy can do what he's done. I've also had a number of comments show up lately that disappeared when I try to open them up. And they'll show up in my alerts. And I mentioned this probably last month. And I thought we figured it out. I thought it was just people who had deleted their comments. But there's been a number of comments that I know that weren't deleted. And I've talked to the people. So bottom line is I can't always read comments when they come in. I don't know what that is, what's going on, but I feel bad because sometimes I want to see what the rest of the comment was, but also oftentimes there's something in there that I want to respond to, and I can't. And so unless there's someone I know well enough to have messaged with, I have no way to reach out to them. So it's a little frustrating. And again, anybody's any insight on that, fill me in. It seems to be more than just people deleting their comments. So, the 45, it's an interesting chapter in music history and even in jazz's history, but it's also a bit of a harbinger in some ways. Developed in the late 40s and launched by RCA with 7 simultaneous releases in 49. And it was confusing to the retailer and to the consumer because you had this new format in the store that required new electronics to play it. And some retailers at the time said it actually led to people coming in looking for something and not being on the format they wanted, and then end up spending nothing instead of more, which no retailer wants that to be the outcome. Of course, the 45 eventually takes off and becomes the iTunes of its day for 99 cents. You know, I've read that the first 45s were going for 50, 65 cents, and probably some even earlier were cheaper than that even. And you're getting 2 songs, one on each side. Some of them even would squeeze 4 songs, 2 really short songs on each side. This, of course, is a really cool Benny Goodman one. I'll flip through some of the 45s that I've got. I don't have a ton of jazz 45s. I got a pretty good 45 collection, but my jazz 45s is more of an LP thing for me. But there's still some interesting insights to be gleaned here. One of the first 45s in 49 that RCA puts out is an Arthur Big Boy Crudup record that ends up becoming an Elvis hit 10 years later. And Elvis really ripped Arthur Big Boy Crudup off a lot, a brother. There was also like a Yiddish song. It was really a diverse set of 745s that RCA puts out in 49. But again, the conflicting gear took a little while for it to catch on. But however, by 1955, Bill Haley's Rock Around the Clock sold 3 million copies. And that's a pretty outstanding number of singles to sell of a song. And I said it's a bit of a harbinger. It does kind of help promote rock and roll to the young kids and helps seal jazz's fate in some ways. Jazz, as it was developing, certainly was going away from the singles and the pop side of things, and the length of songs on jazz records weren't going to be compatible with the 45. You, of course, could edit them and make them 45 length, but you'd often be taking the solos or just really dissecting the piece. And so a lot of artists, I doubt there's a lot of Mingus suites on 45, you know. Ellington did use them. Columbia, Capitol, all those labels are jumping right in. And of course, the major labels are the first to really jump on it. Columbia, Capitol, Decca, RCA, as I said. They have a pretty good catalog of material and the money in the deep pockets to do it. And the 45 RPM was really successful because of jukeboxes. And people wanted the jukebox in their home if they could have it. But the most important thing was every local bar and watering hole had a jukebox. And a jukebox ends up becoming a great reflection of the neighborhood it's in. And the owners are going to end up filling it with the 45s that its regular patrons kind of are asking for. And so different neighborhoods, jukeboxes would be a really interesting little set of insight and information into a demographic and the marketplace and what people were buying. It's also, we're going to look at the 45s that are put up by the jazz labels and just how it shows us who the commercial, more viable artists were for some of these labels, what was selling, what they were hoping to sell, and less the edges of the music. The edges of the music weren't getting a lot of love. But by 1974, the industry sold 200 million 45s. And then it starts a slow decline into somewhat of a disuse. And then now it's kind of become a retro thing again. Artists will put out a 45 in addition to their record. It has a bit of a return glory, as it were. But it certainly hasn't made the resurgence that the LP has made. Anyway, this is Benny Goodman. Probably from the 30s, I would guess. 38 Carnegie Hall. And this is the 1 o'clock jump, and Don't Be That Way. Some great musicians are on this. Long list of a lot of Columbia releases right there. A lot of Ellington, Errol Garner, Benny Goodman, Victor Louis Armstrong, Pearl Bailey, Victor Borgia, Rosemary Clooney, Frankie Lane, Danny Kaye, Harry James, Sinatra, Rodgers and Hart favorites, Paul Weston, Teddy Wilson, Frankie Yankovic. So a lot of stuff was kind of saturated fairly quickly onto the marketplace. A lot of these 45s play and sound pretty good, but I find they're a little tougher to predict exactly how they're going to sound when you get them. This is the great Sing Sing Sing. Of course, you can see Krupa, Goodman, and Harry James on the cover there. The arrangements of Sing 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 are some of the craziest in the history of music, if you ask me. When you listen to some of the movements in there, it's got all the swells, crashes, throbs, shifts. It just lobs itself around with such force and weight and viscosity. It's just this wave of sound that splashes. And I've heard dubstep that's got this swirling, twirling sections kind of overlapping and vibrating over each other. And you definitely hear that in parts of the Sing 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 composition. It also kind of illustrates the monster that Gene Krupa is and was. Just a monster. From what I've read, this song would tear down concert halls. And they weren't playing in arenas and stadiums back in those days in the music business. You would play a local theater. And so you maybe get 2,500 white kids in there to see Benny Goodman on a Sunday afternoon. And they would just start shaking the concert hall. And for being an unamplified music, it was amazing how powerful swing music could be. How dynamic, how much it could fill a hall with its brass and its low ends and its pulsing rhythms. And sometimes the piano gets as lost as anything in these great swing orchestras. But an incredible song. And Goodman, of course, is one of the great masters of swing music. But he also used the great Fletcher Henderson, one of the first great black swing composers and arrangers, to write a lot of his charts. When he heard that Fletcher was on some tough times financially, I believe in the early 30s, he grabbed the chance to grab up some of Fletcher Henderson's songbook and his compositions and arrangements, and then I think eventually even hired him to start writing charts for him. Ellington has quite a bit of stuff that's put on 45 over the course of years, and Ellington's discography is as tough a discography you get a grasp on in the jazz kingdom. It's just so broad. It's so It covers so many eras. This is the Ellington, Skin Deep and the Mooch. I think Louis Bellson's drumming on this one, if I recall. Doesn't say here in the back. I think I have the album. I think it's the Ellington Uptown record, where these songs probably come from. But again, just nice little cover. It's got that vintage piano piece lessons. Like that could be the cover for 1953 grade 3 piano handbook. You know, that kind of thing. It's fun. And now there's the wonderful swing and sound of Ellington. So Columbia, Rosemary Clooney, who actually does some work with Ellington at times. RCA has Artie Shaw, the great Begin the Beguine, which for my money is one of the greatest songs ever made. It's got such a haunting melody, and it's just gorgeous. It's just a gorgeous piece. and Shaw's creamy, smooth, limited vibrato. It's just, he's charming all the serpents you have. You know what I mean? He ain't just hanging out in India or in Egypt charts. He's charming everybody all over the planet. You know, he's doing his thing. RCA, this is Capitol. Capitol, of course, things like Nat King Cole, Peggy Lee. This is the Fever 7-inch. This is a 4-song EP. Woody Herman's on Capitol, and it's a cool little. Then some Decca stuff here. Ella Fitzgerald, little mini 4 EP thing. This is can't see. Another Peggy Lee, Crazy in the Heart on Decca. She was on Decca for a while. This is Blueberry Hill by Louis Armstrong. And I started collecting the Jazz 45s to play at my DJ gigs. You know, there's times where I didn't know how much jazz I was going to need at a set, depending on where it was. You know, especially one-offs and weddings and stuff. I didn't want to fill my crates up with a bunch of jazz LPs where at most I knew I was going to play that one song from that if I needed to. And so having a stack of 45s I could throw in my bag gave me 20 jazz tracks if I needed them for the right coffee lounge atmosphere vibe if I needed it. And it was a fun way to have jazz with me for the in-case times. Of course, when I have a residency somewhere, I know better what I'm going to play and what people are expecting me to hear and whether jazz is going to be a part of my night or not. And my Red Cow Sunday, Saturday brunch gig, I was bringing a whole crate of jazz to that, LPs, and I would play out of my 5-hour set, at least an hour and a half of it would be jazz tracks. And I would use it to glue and stitch together soul, R&B, hip-hop, classic rock, classic pop, stuff like Bobby Darin. I would just stitch together so many different things. And jazz was this great glue that I could go out of this and put a little bit of this in there. You know, a little guitar jazz, a little Joe Puma. And then slip into some Latin Joe Cuba. You know, it's a really interesting transition thing. And I often wouldn't play, if I put a Blue Note record on, I wouldn't play It's All 8 minutes. I'd let the first chorus play, and maybe the first verse or soloist, and the second chorus, and then after like 2-3 minutes, I would move on to another poppier, more R&B, more synth. There's a lot of kind of synth trap pop from like present stuff I would play, and so I wouldn't let people get bored and disinterested with the jazz. I would keep it kind of minimal so that it had an attracting, comfortable nature to it, but it didn't get exhausting or boring or, okay, put something else on, you know? And I've always kind of shied away from bright horns at my jazz gigs because bright horns are just overbearing in a lot of ways. But again, Begin the Beguine's such a fantastic song, and it's a song I played at plenty of events. This fantastic little 7-inch here, The Damn Yankees on Mercury, has one of my favorite tracks ever, Sarah Vaughan's Whatever Lola Wants. And I played this at many of my gigs as well. In fact, coffee got spilled at it at one point. But you got to live with some of that stuff as a DJ. This is a Sophie Tucker Mercury single, which I bought just because it was next to nothing at a garage sale. This is a Sarah Vaughan on Mercury, fun little piece. This is Liberty's Cry Me a River by Julie London, which is one of my favorite songs ever as well, and another record I've played at gigs endlessly. And so this was a lot of what the Blue Notes, the Prestiges of Riverside were going up against. Not only was all this pop, soft vocal, Nat Cole, Peggy Lee, Julie London, Frank Sinatra, not only was all that going on and that against that backdrop, rock and roll was starting to sprout. You know, so with Elvis and Buddy Holly and Eddie Cochran and Gene Vincent, that was very 45 driven music. So the kids were buying them 45s, and the 78s were being kind of shunned. So all that old music on 78 was yesterday's news, which helped put it helped put a block on their interest in what came before. And of course, the 10-inch LP gets launched in 50-51, which kind of reinterests kids in the long play format, and jazz had some success there. And eventually on the LP, jazz makes its last final stand. But it was a tough sledding for a label like Blue Note to come along and make inroads once rock and roll had really started to take over. And that's truly what happens, you know. And by the 60s, the Beatles, the Stones, it's just dominated by rock and roll. And so, but Blue Note knew to be competitive, they needed to get these Three Sounds jukebox 45s into the right neighborhoods. And so when you look at some of my Blue Note 45s here, what you'll really see is the commercially viable side of Blue Note. Kenny Burrell, Wavy Gravy. Horace Silver, Friday McNasty. Lou Donaldson, The Humpback. Jimmy Smith, Bucket. Ike Quebec, Intermezzo. Kenny Burrell, Chitlins Con Carne. Horace Silver, The Jody Grind. Jimmy Smith at the organ, Blue Moon, Part 1. Three Sounds is playing right. Come on, little bud. So the Three Sounds that we're listening to right now, they were a real instrumental part of the success of what Blue Note was doing. Jimmy Smith, Lou Donaldson, even the stuff that had a more commercial Horace Silver. Those 45s are very much a reflection of the artists that Blue Note was selling, and could make it into black neighborhoods and black bars and watering holes. And so the 45 does instruct us as to what the labels thought had commercial potential. Let's jump through a few more things here. Some prestige choices. The Oregon Jazz 45 became a pretty popular thing. Bobby Timmons, this is a good little song by him, getting it together. Don't Go to Strangers by Gene Ammons. Greasy by Sonny Chris, which is backed with Sunrise Sunset, which is just a gorgeous version of that. Misty by Groove Holmes, which I believe is the big Errol Garner hit. Blue Gator, again by Gene Ammons. Sorry, this is about Willis Jackson. Here's a Riverside Solitude by Johnny Lytle, the vibraphone player. On Jazzland, here's another Johnny Lytle, Moonchild. On Bethlehem, I got this cool Nina Simone, I Loves You Porgy, and that was a pretty big hit for Bethlehem, from my understanding. Verve had a lot of stuff that had some 45 success. Willie Bobo, Knock on Wood. Of course, Getz Astro Gilberto, Funny World, little promo 45 there. Call Me here by Walter Wanderley. This is Wes Montgomery. Jimmy Smith and Kenny Burrell with Grady Tate. Here's a cool Johnny Hartman, Once in Every Lifetime. It was almost like a song. This is from the Beehive label. Kind of a tough thing to find, cool thing. This is Miles Davis, Time After Time, from in the early 80s, the Cyndi Lauper track. And I played that at gigs a lot of times, and almost always I played that. Someone was like, oh, who was that? And that's Miles Davis. Tom Before, this is a cool record from CTI that I enjoy a lot. Eddie Harris, Listen Here, on Atlantic. Herbie Hancock from Columbia a little later on. So that's some of the Jazz 45s I've got. I got more of them. Like I said, I got a pretty good collection of 45s, but this is stuff I just wanted to kind of show you. It just shows you how tough the marketplace was in that time, you know, and that the transitions were happening, and the 45 is an interesting line in the sand. And once those kids switched to that format and bought their 45 RPM players, it made the 78 era obsolete that much quicker. And of course, stuff from the 78 era was going to get issued on 45 and on 10-inch and eventually on LP. But it does seem to have a bit of a line in the sand, and the kids started buying those 45s, and the next thing you know, they're swooping up Chuck Berry and, like I said, Eddie Cochran and Bill Haley, you know. So it really leads to a real change in how people bought and looked at music. It was the first iTunes where you consumed one song at a time, or two with the B-side. And sometimes B-sides can be interesting pieces that you don't get on albums. Sometimes the A-side itself wasn't going to be on a record, like the Stones' Honky Tonk. That wasn't that uncommon. Bob Dylan's Rainy Day Woman. One of Dylan's big songs wasn't on an LP either. But anyway, so that's about some of my Jazz 45s. It's fun stuff to look at. It's fun stuff to play at a gig. And people, when you play a 45 at a gig, always are like oohing and on. Like, oh, cool. I haven't seen one of those forever, you know. Which, you get that with the LPs too, but LPs are a little bit more commonplace to people. Especially since people see Serato and Tractor, and they have those kind of fake digital records that people think, oh, they're still playing records, you know. But when you're playing a 45, there's no way that you can misconstrue that for anything but a vintage LP and or 45, sorry. But I've enjoyed them. They're fun to play at gigs. Nice way to have a nice little selection of tracks when you're not sure you want to have those LPs in your crate. You can grab a little stack of 45s and have those bases covered. And with soul as well, there's a lot of great soul songs that sold as 45 very efficiently, but didn't sell much at all as LPs. So it's easier to find a lot of the great soul songs on 45. And it's another great way to play some of the classic soul songs at a gig, is to bust out some 45s. But honestly, for in the home, the LPs are much more convenient. Unless you're standing there entertaining people and DJing or have a jukebox, the 45 doesn't have a huge place in the modern collector's world today. Aside from being a bit of a novelty, I got the 45 by Radiohead with the rare B-side. It's kind of become that. It's very niche now and doesn't have a real place in the music marketplace. But it has managed to survive. You know, it's probably attached itself somewhat to the legacy of the LP. I think the 10-inch LP has done that somewhat as well. I don't see the 78 ever making a resurgence. Sorry, Victrola guys out there. But 45s, they're fun. They're not that expensive. You should never pay more than $5-6 for a 45, really, unless it's something super collectible. And in my judgment, it's even tougher to get a grade on how a 45 is going to sound via pictures. So I would be very careful buying 45s for good money. There are, of course, Northern Soul records and rare pieces that go for hundreds of dollars, but that ain't me. You ain't gonna find me at those auctions ever, you know. Anyway, Josh Shepard, my name's Dan. I'm still working on that guitar thing. I'm hoping to get the few records I'm waiting on this week. So hopefully I'll have the guitar thing out sometime next weekend, maybe early next week, maybe. But I don't think it'll be any earlier than this coming weekend. But I got some other fun stuff coming in between then and now. Y'all stay tuned. Subscribe if you haven't. If you want to be a Patreon and support me with a few bucks a month, please go to my Patreon page in the link below. If you just want to buy some merchandise, Jazz Shepard stuff, there's also a link below for that. So you can help market the channel and help support me and my family a little bit during these tough times if you got it. If you don't got it, obviously I'm not here to make money doing this. I need to make a little money somehow, but this is just an expression of my love and passion for the music. And so if the channel makes some money eventually, that's great. And to all my Patreon supporters so far, thank you. It's a nice little extra chunk every month, but it's still very much a minimal source of income for me. YouTube itself pays me very next to nothing. That's hopefully will change as time goes on. But again, with the content, what we're talking about, we're never going to be a viral sensation talking about race and social issues in America, and a music that has such a small following, which, in spite of its growth and popularity in our perspectives, for the most part, the average majority of Americans don't know nothing about jazz. Nothing. And if they know anything, Miles Davis might be the name they come up with, maybe Louis Armstrong, but it's really minimal what people know about jazz. Even my three brothers, who are all a couple years younger than me, as much of a jazz fan as I am, as much as I talk about jazz, and I don't hang out around them talking about jazz very often, but I don't think any of them could name more than 2 or 3 jazz artists. My brother David could probably name Miles, Coltrane, and a few others, and I probably talk jazz with him the most. My brother Tim knows music pretty well, but he's very much a rock and roll blues guy and has very little comprehension or interest in jazz. And my brother Paul doesn't seem to give a shit about music much, alone jazz and the history of that kind of music. So it's great that we have this family to talk about it, because it keeps us talking and making it feel like it's something bigger than it is. But in reality, we're a very small minority. Y'all stay safe. It's all about love, trying to be positive. Let's hope for 2021 to be a great year, guys. Talk to y'all soon. Peace.